Well, then why don't I'm all for transparency, Mr. Chairman, I want to say that. But why don't we skip the foreplay and go right to the sex and outlaw vertical integration for Part D? Would you accept an amendment to your bill like that?
I don't want to answer that question right now because I want to study that.
Hey folks, this is True Voice. I just watched the Why Don't We Skip the Foreplay and Go Right to the Sex hearing. Spoiler, Kennedy's savage one-liners are great theater, but there's a bigger fight here, standing up for everyday Americans against corporate greed. Let's watch.
Thank you, Senator Coons. Senator Kennedy.
Professor Sood, as I understand it, 80% of the PBM market is controlled by three companies, three PBMs, that are vertically integrated. Is that right?
That is correct.
Does your research show that the prices that consumers pay are higher than they would be if those companies were not vertically integrated?
So my research on Medicare Part D...
Give me an answer.
Partially.
What do you mean partially? They're either higher or they're lower.
So
There's no such thing as a partial price.
what I find is that Medicare Part D premiums are higher as a result of vertical integration.
Okay. Well, then why don't I'm all for transparency, Mr. Chairman, I want to say that. But why don't we skip the foreplay and go right to the sex and outlaw vertical integration for Part D? Would you accept an amendment to your bill like that?
I don't want to answer that question right now because I want to study that.
Would you support that, Mr. Scott? Let me just guess what your answer is.
No, sir, and I can explain why.
No, you speak Sanskrit. I mean, I'm sorry. You know, you're good at it, and I know your job is to protect the PBMs. And I might tell us I don't think PBMs are the only ones at fault, but you don't have unclean hands. Professor Sood, you say PBMs ought to be fiduciaries. To whom?
To both the plan and their members.
Well, what if the plan and the members' interests diverge? Who are they fiduciaries to?
Ultimately, in principle, they should be fiduciaries to the members.
Okay.
So, for example, ERISA makes...
I get it.
Okay.
I get it. Mr. Chairman, again, why don't we skip the foreplay and go right to the sex? Why don't we just amend your bill to require that PBMs have a fiduciary obligation to plan members?
Well, I think that's been suggested, and I think there's part of that in our legislation, but probably not fully enough to satisfy you.
Well,
So let me look at what you want to add to it.
okay. I mean, I'm not criticizing your bill. I don't want my office to end up in Bethesda. So I'm not criticizing your bill. I like transparency. But we're just nibbling around the edges here. And with respect, Mr. Scott, your definition of a fiduciary is wrong. A fiduciary isn't somebody that controls the decision. You know that, and I know that. A fiduciary is somebody who has a legal obligation to give his client the best advice and to do what's best for his client. It doesn't replace agent with principal or vice versa. You know that, and I know that. Well, you need to talk to your lawyers. I may be wrong, but I doubt it. Let me go back to Professor Sood. Tell me two things you would do tomorrow to fix PBMs and result in lower prices for consumers.
So I think the two things I would do is...
Very specific.
Yes. I would implement price transparency so that everyone knows what they're paying. And we can
Okay, price transparency just tells us who's screwing who.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the fiduciary responsibility says, if you're getting screwed, I can take you to court. So I would do those two things. And those are, I think, better than, banning particular practices, because otherwise it's whack-a-mole. You ban spread pricing and something else will show up
Okay.
a year from now.
I got 29 seconds. Do you have any other suggestions? I appreciate your
So
straight talk.
the other thing we can do is, what I recommended is pass-through of rebates to patients. So suppose a drug,
Say that again?
so pass-through of rebates to patients.
Uh-huh.
So for example, the list price of a drug is $50,000, but the rebate on the drug is $40,000. So when a patient is paying cost sharing, suppose 10%, they should be paying on the post-rebate price. So which is the $50,000 less the $40,000 rebate. Right now, what's happening is patients are paying cost sharing on the $50,000. So this would immediately lower patient out-of-pocket costs. So as Dr. Kircher said, for the cancer patients,
So you're saying the number after us, the PBMs are jacking up, are encouraging manufacturers to jack up the list price so they can jack up their rebates.
and that...
Is that right?
Yes.
That's
and,
illegal.
And the jacked
That's
up...
illegal.
Yes. I don't know about that, but it...
I do.
Okay.
It's illegal as hell.
Yeah.
Kennedy's right that 3 giant PBMs control 80% of the market. But let's be clear, we wouldn't be in this mess without decades of deregulation and cozy ties between lawmakers and Big Pharma. It's unacceptable that a few profit-hungry middlemen decide how much we pay. Professor Sudd confirms vertical integration drives up Medicare Part D costs. That's on us too. Letting private companies dictate our drug coverage is a failure of political will. We should be expanding Medicare for all, not patching holes in a broken system. I love Kennedy's bluntness about outlawing vertical integration. But the real question is, will he back a bold federal takeover of drug pricing or just tweak around the edges? We need structural change, not PR stunts. Putting PBMs under a legal duty to serve patients first sounds great. But history shows you can't trust a fiduciary clause alone when corporations will lobby, litigate, and loophole their way out. We need enforceable public options with real teeth and watchdogs empowered to shut down bad actors. Kennedy calls it nibbling around the edges. I completely agree. Transparency laws and fiduciary duties are steps in the right direction. But by themselves, they won't stop PBMs from gaming the system. The left's job is to push for single-payer or, at minimum, a robust public alternative that competes on price and service. Price transparency and fiduciary responsibility are important tools, but only part of the toolkit. We also need rebate pass-through, caps on out-of-pocket spending, and prosecution for price-fixing conspiracies. And yes, break these monopolies. Passing rebates directly to patients would cut out some corporate padding. But the real cure is taking healthcare out of profit-seeking hands. Imagine a world where your doctor prescribes the best medication for you, not the one that yields the biggest kickback. Kennedy calls inflated list prices illegal as hell. He's right morally, but enforcement is weak. We need criminal penalties for collusion and price gouging, not just symbolic Senate theatrics. If you believe healthcare is a human right and not a business model, hit like, subscribe, and share. Contact your representatives, demand Medicare for all, anti-monopoly breakups for PBMs, and real accountability. Enough foreplay. Let's get to the sex, the full-blown revolution in American healthcare.